This is November, and prompt for day 19 is fluid. So I created this little river scene with a salmon-like fish, and I've had a bunch of questions on how I did it. So just a little time lapse of this process. Looking at this, it was actually about 8 hours of total work on this. I spent a lot of time figuring out how to do things, so it took me quite some time. What I'm doing here is I'm just separating a plane into a bunch of different quadrants. I don't actually use all of them, but I had originally thought I'd use 4 objects, so I was going to cut the plane into 4 separate bits. I'm now using a distance to cut out a circle and then lift that up with vector displacement, and then I'm using a curve multiplication just to straighten up the edges. So I'm using a range mask to lift that up so you don't get horrid jagged edges on there. So this is going to be the water. So I'm using a bunch of different Voronoi textures there, and then I'm animating them with hashtag frame and just different speeds and directions, and when they're overlaid on top of each other they give a nice little water feeling. I'm now also just going to use Fresnel on that just to make it feel a little bit more watery, and I'm going to mix the principal BDSF with a gloss so I can get just that little bit of a blurriness to the underwater. I think it just looks a little bit more rivery with that. And then I also just add a magic texture over here to use some colors to distort the water a little bit, just to make it feel a little bit more watery. And then a wave texture to add some little ripples that run down the river. Again, this is controlled with the hashtag frame, and then I'm also just mixing it up a little bit, using some levels and curves just to get some little foam crests on there, and then some RGB curves just to change the shapes, so it's just a little bit feeling a bit more like water. You may notice that my nodes are horrible, so it's every now and then I try and organize them a little bit better. Okay, so now I'm going to do the same thing to cut out a little circle for the riverbed, and trying to position it here in the center of the water. One thing I do struggle a little bit with this video is scaling things. I haven't quite figured out the best way to do that, but near the end I do figure out some methods for that. So I'm going to do a similar thing using a Voronoi and some distortion for the position of that, just to make it feel a little bit more random, and using some RGB curves and stuff to reshape it just to feel a little bit more like rocks. Trying to organize my files a little bit better, and trying to figure out just some positioning things for this. Still really figuring out a lot of this vector displacement. I definitely would recommend you check out Erindale's videos, because that's where I've learned a lot of stuff. I'm going to post that up in the cards so you can check that out. He's done some tutorials on vector displacement, especially for the stuff that I did with reshaping the fish, which you'll see just now. I'm also using the Voronoi that I use for the waves on the rocks, so then we can get that sort of fake caustics effect, so that little shimmering light under the surface of the water. So then I'm just trying to reshape that and fit that under the water. This is where I'm just trying to figure out the scaling. And then I also just use another layer of circles to, well, the distance, to just flatten the edges of that, so that the rocks don't have sort of sticky out edges outside the edge of the water frame. I'm actually quite happy with how this river scene turned out. I think it looks fairly realistic, and yeah, it was fun. So now I'm cutting out the section for the fish. I was originally going to use the other quarter for making like a waterfall or something, but I decided I'd just make the fish because this was already taking quite some time. So I'm using Erindale's little tips on how to flatten out, well, take a flat thing and roll it into a cylinder. And then I spent a lot of time figuring out how to reshape it into a fish shape. In the end, I was probably using it multiplications in the wrong place, and basically you just need to multiply where you apply the sine and cos to the x and the y values. Not after, you've got to do that before you add them up. So I'm just getting a distance from the center of the fish and using that to multiply the value so I can sort of reshape it from the center of the fish using RGB curves and multiplying that in to just change the shape. And then I also do a mix of positive and negative so I can reshape the front, the head of the fish, and then the tail separately so we can get, tail fins and mouth shapes sort of things. Not that I actually make a mouth. I tried to keep it fairly simple. I also was considering adding fins, but I tried to keep things simple. That would have probably taken me several hours to figure out, and it already, as I said, took me about 8 hours to make this whole thing. So I was having a lot of issues where it would sort of unfold the sort of cylinder, and that's just because I was multiplying it in the wrong place. So a lot of this stuff you'll see is me just dragging those around and multiplying things in different places to see if it works, and then if it doesn't, just messing around with that, and then eventually I figured out, oh wait, no, I'm doing this in the wrong place. So then I'm just thinning out sections, fattening bits, just to make it feel fishy shape. So I was going for a sort of a salmon here, thinning out the tail fin there, thinning out the fin, sorry. And then this is using a knurling, I don't know how you pronounce that, shader, and then using a heart texture on that. So these are from an add-on just to get some more nodes, and I'm using that to make the scales. I'll put that in the description so you can check it out. And yeah, so it's now basically looking like a fish. I add a little bit of a tail sort of fin hump there. I forget what that fin is called. I did consider adding the pectoral fin, but I just avoided doing that. So now what I'm using is a wave texture, and I'm going to multiply that along the body and then use that with a vector rotation to now make the fish swim. So using that wave, we can just adjust the strength, so then move that down the body with the hashtag frame, and then it basically looks like a swimming fish. So yeah, I was just saying I sort of struggled with the scaling. Eventually I did figure out how to do this, basically again just applying it right when we do the sine and cos for the cylinder creation. So then I've got a little scaled down fish so he fits in the water. I'm just moving him around with vector additions and stuff like that, just so it fits in the water. This process was a little bit annoying because just still figuring out this vector displacement. But I thought it looked pretty cool. And then I also use some sine waves to just bob the fish up and down a bit, so it sort of feels like he's just swimming down the river. As you can see, I went backwards and forwards on the scaling, like bits would unfold, and then this is where I actually properly figure out how to scale him. And there you go, it's basically the finished scene. I just wanted to make a little bit more ripply waves coming down the river, so it sort of gives more directional feel to it. And adjusting the crests of that. So now I'm animating the thing just so I can do it to the flat and the clay render, just so you can get a feel for that, and adding in just some little camera animation so we can zoom out and then zoom in. And then I decide that I want to add just a little bit more detail to the fish, so I'm creating a shader for that to get the position of the eyes. So I'm using absolute to get a X and a Y, just the X mirrored across the fish, so I can put in a distance to a point for both the left and the right of the fish. And using a color ramp, I can just make the little pupils and stuff on the fish. And then I just apply this to the height and the metallicness and roughness of the fish, just so that the texture feels better. Then I just add another color ramp based on the vertical position of the fish to add that sort of lateral line and just a little bit of a color. So fish are normally darker at the top and then more white or silvery at the base for predators, so that they can't see them from different directions. Just spend a little bit of time just tweaking all the material properties of curves just to blend it all nicely. And then I think the next thing I do is add a little bit more detail to the fish. I use a polka dot texture from that plugin to add a little bit of dots on the fish. And then a wave texture multiplied with a distance just to get that little transparency for the tail fin there, just to get that sort of bony tail appearance to that. And then just spending a little bit of time to organize these nodes because they're absolutely crazy, and deleting unnecessary ones. And then I decide to add a gill section to the fish because I think it just makes it feel more fishy. If I wasn't going to do all the fins, I would just try and make him look a little fishy. So I'm just using that in the height and the color, and adding in a better HDRI to make it feel more sort of like a forest scene. And then just a little bit of compositing settings just to get a little bit of what's called chromatic aberration on the edges, and rendering it out. I would then also rendered it out without the water, so you can see the fish a little bit better, because I think you can't quite see it when it's distorted in the water. So here's the final node group, node graph. Edited out and simplified it just so it's a little bit easy to see. There's the fish shader. You can see the color for the eye, the body, and the heights. This is there when I'm mixing all the different shaders. So there's the body of the water. So there's the glass for the water mixing with the other bits of the water. And then probably the most complicated section is creating the shape of the fish at the bottom there. So I don't know if you can quite read all the nodes in there, but hopefully it helps a little bit. And the shapes for the beds and the water waves. So that's really just a combination of raw noise going in different directions, and I think it very effectively creates a nice little water feel. And yeah, I hope you enjoyed this. I hope this was useful, and check out my Instagram at PhotonWind, or Twitter. I've got a bunch of these other nodevembers that I've created. And I also stream on Twitch, twitch.tv/PhotonWind, if you want to check out some of my other Blender stuff when I do it live. All right, thanks for joining in, and see you next time.